Hello and welcome again to Restoration Talks. The last time we were here, we had Shara, who very courageously opened herself up to share her experience of grief in the passing of her mum. That is your late wife. And today we have Pastor Delroy Smith, who has very bravely stepped into the hot seat. So we recently saw your video about finding love again. It was very interesting. It was short but sweet, but I think it probably left people with a lot more questions. And so what we wanted to do today is to hear a little bit more, to see if we can dig a little bit deeper into your journey.
Okay.
So, sir, if you don't mind, this week I'm going to take off my hat as one of your as one of your congregation. I'm going to dig in deeper.
Okay.
And just find out a little bit more about you.
Yeah,
and what
that's
you have
no
to
problem.
say.
That's all good.
Brilliant. So beforehand, there may be some people that did see the video, maybe some people that haven't. Maybe there's a bit more of a curiosity around who you are. So first of all, Pastor Delroy, how can you tell us a little bit about you? Who are you, and how would you like to describe yourself to your listeners today?
Yeah, I'm Pastor Delroy. I'm the senior pastor for Restoration City Church, based in Croydon. That's who I am and what I do. I have two children, Irene and Shara, and also a grandfather as well. Summarize it in one.
Yeah, and newly grandfather as well.
That's
so congratulations. How's that going?
That's all good. That's really good. Our granddaughter's beautiful and growing quickly.
Yeah,
and enjoying the best times now, man. Enjoying the best times rather than the cry times. Yeah, now's the fun begins.
Yeah, brilliant, and it never ends. Can you tell us a little bit about your relationship journey? And I ask this because I guess sometimes there's a curiosity when people, when we're asking advice on relationships, in a sense, what qualifies you as Pastor Delroy to tell us about, finding love after loss? Can you just take us back a little bit so we can know a bit more about your past in terms of your relationship and your late wife?
Okay. I met my late wife, Caroline. We worked together in a retail store in Alders, and it was a place where there was a lot of people of our culture that was there, a lot of church people that was there as well, and we tend to bond a lot in terms of lunch times, or if there's any particular activities, we used to get together and just hang out with each other. After being working there for years, we went out one day. We was meant to be going to a concert, and the concert got cancelled, and so we didn't know about the cancellation until about half an hour beforehand, or 45 minutes beforehand. By that time, I was already dressed and ready to go. Then we got the call saying the concert was cancelled. So it was just like, okay, what do we do now? So we decided, let's just go somewhere and have something to eat. And in doing that, we ended up in Victoria, and we were sat down together, and was just generally just chatting, and asking, talking about family and church and things like that. And it was while I was sitting across the table that the Lord just spoke to me while I was there, that this was going to be the woman I was going to marry.
Okay.
And that was just really crazy. And because of how I am just prophetically, I can literally see everything happening. I can see the wedding day. I can see like the children. It just details was there, and it was just a really strange experience to have. And then in our conversations together, we just had so much things in common in terms of both of our fathers dying whilst, almost in the same time whilst we was young, having a strong mother that held a big family together, a matriarchal over the whole family. We just had so much things in common. And in 1989, we got married, and we had just a really good marriage. It was a lot of communication, a lot of talking, and she was a person who was just I've not come across someone like that who was just so committed to me and committed to the family, just literally devoted herself to making sure that I was all right, devoted herself to understanding what my goals and my visions and what my dreams were, and just came alongside and sacrificed herself to ensure that those dreams and visions came to pass. And she was just an incredible person, and very, very devoted. So we was married for 32 years, and in September 21, on the 9th of September, was when we was going to celebrate our 32nd anniversary. And so I planned to take her away on holiday, and she kept saying no, she doesn't want to go on holiday. And I was just like, what woman don't want to go on holiday? You know, she sacrificed. She does the cleaning, she does the cooking, she does my clothes, she does everything. So the least I can do, because we always try to outdo each other in terms of serving each other, and so the least I can do is take her away and pamper her and spoil her. But she was like, no, she doesn't want to go on holiday. And I kept pestering her, till finally kind of broke her down, and she said yes. And then, unfortunately, on the 5th of September, just 4 days before our anniversary, unfortunately, she passed away. But prior to that, we've always had to, what I've always said, we've always had the conversations, even from the onset of us dating. We always had deep conversations. So we talked on all kinds of subjects, loss, grief, you name it, we talked about it. So we kind of had conversation in terms of, if any of us had passed, if she passed or I passed, what we would want for each other. So we've had those kind of conversations, and obviously making sure that our children are looked after. So but it doesn't matter how much you speak, when it happens, it is absolutely, for me, it was absolutely huge.
I can imagine. Sounds like something you, even with all those conversations, something that you couldn't have really prepared for. Nothing prepared.
No, not in regards to. It was when it happened. It was, although as a minister you do funerals for other people, but for me I was just so numb. I just couldn't wrap my head around what just happened. And the unfortunate thing about it was that we had so many people who were, because she comes from a large family, I come from a large family, plus we've got the church family, and they all were fantastic and wanted to support us and wanted to love us and comfort us and be there for us. But for me, it got to a point where I couldn't get my head on it. I needed a moment just to kind of answer, what's going on? Where is she? What's happened? And because it was just constantly, the phones were ringing, people were coming round, I never had that moment to kind of digest the enormity of what had happened. So it took a little bit of while to and it was really uncomfortable and really difficult to say to people that I need a moment, I need a space, because I needed to process what has happened, because it was something that happened very suddenly. And so it didn't really shake my faith in terms of my faith with God. It was just trying to get my head around it, the whole situation. And because I always thought I was going to be the one who would go first, because I had been battling with cancer, and I was waiting for the results to find out if the cancer had come back. So I was kind of more tentative in regards to of what's going to happen to me in terms of going through this. And
so all of that was happening at the same time.
Exactly at the same time. So it was a lot to get my head around when it comes to grief. It was so much.
So a couple of things you said there that I think would be really useful to touch on. One of the things you said is that we had, you and Carolyn had spoken about these things, you had spoken about death, you kind of knew what each other wanted should it happen. Can you tell us, what were some of those things? What were some of those plans, those ideas, those thoughts that you had around that, perhaps together and before the situation happened to you?
The key thing was in terms of, the preparation and in terms of making sure there's provisions for the children, and provisions if any of us had gone, making sure that there is enough. Because for me, one thing she used to drive home for me, make sure we had life insurance, just practical things, make sure you have life insurance. You know, she was hammering on me in terms of savings. Where's our savings? I was like, you're spending all the money and you're talking about savings. Where am I going to get savings from? And some of the practical things, we did talk about relationship in regards to if any of us, if she was to die before me or I was to die before her, for me it was I wanted her to go into another relationship with my blessing. And she wanted the same for me. So we talked about that, and just in terms of the church, but because it was mainly my thinking I was going to go, I was just trying to make sure that everything in terms of the home and finances are, you know, is as comfortable as possible, and that in our relationship, because when I went through the cancer, there was a lot of challenges because they diagnosed me with having post-traumatic stress disorder because of the combination of serious operations which I've had to go through, and different traumas that I've had to go through in my life. So we had to work through some issues in regards to our relationship, making sure our relationship was in the right place. And thank God we were just about an hour before she passed away, we was talking about our relationship, and one of the things she was just saying is that how happy she is in a relationship, and so that's why in a way I was really thankful to the Lord that we didn't find her in in a shopping centre or on the street. Something happened to her on the street. Everything that happened was she passed away in my arms, and so there was a lot of things in the midst of the tears and the midst of everything. God was still there, and His hands were there. In the midst of everything, and I'm really grateful to the Lord in terms of how things. We never want someone to go,
of course,
but the way how He done it, He done it in the best way possible for me, and I'm really grateful to the Lord in how He's done it, so it wasn't so traumatic in that sense.
That's quite interesting to hear you say it in that way, because you've spoken about post-traumatic stress yourself, which is something that I know you've bravely touched upon before, and that's something you were already dealing with. We know there's been multiple health challenges you've had and overcome along the way. Lots of different other events that you would have had to, go through, whether it's in your immediate family, wider family, the church. A lot was happening, and you've also got COVID in the middle of this. So there is so many different things, and let's remember, you're a pastor. So you're not just looking at this from the perspective of a husband and a father, but you've also got this congregation that are also very dependent on you in terms of how do we go through all these things. So you've spoken about post-traumatic stress and the fact that, quite rightly, it wasn't that you came home to find Caroline. It wasn't that you heard you've got to come and she's somewhere in the street. But actually, even just being there in itself, experiencing what you experienced, being in the room, holding her in your arms, in a sense, some will look at that and say, isn't that in itself a level of trauma? How would you respond to that?
It's losing someone is always going to be very difficult. And because I've done so many funerals before, one of the things I always say to people and families is look beyond the pain, beyond the tears, look for a signature from God. There's always, God always has a signature somewhere. I remember when I had to do a funeral for a young baby, and the family was just absolutely distraught. All of us was. It was so difficult. But I always believe that God somehow has a signature. And I remember when I was going to do the funeral, and we went to the place of the committal, and it was pouring, absolutely pouring down with rain. A lot of the people there were unbelievers. And when we got to around the place of the committal, all of a sudden the cloud parted, the rain stopped, and the sun began to shine, and it shined exactly where we were.
Amazing.
And I was able to turn to them and said, do you see what I mean? Somewhere in the midst of the pain, we're still going to be crying, but somehow God's signature turns up somewhere.
Yeah.
And for me, his signature of the closeness I had with Carolyn, to have her in my arms, because my commitment to her when I got married was to love her, and I wanted to be true to my vow till our very last breath is to love her till death us do part. And so I kept that covenant, and so that covenant in terms of us joining hands together and heart together at the beginning is the ending is exactly the same way. So it was beautiful for me. It was a beautiful way of God just reminding me that in the midst of everything, he was still there. That's how I took it. That's how I interpret it.
Brilliant. You know, it's lots of people when they've lost somebody, particularly somebody so close, you know, and when someone's lost a spouse, there is often, you know, and actually, can I just say, loss doesn't always have to mean death. Sometimes we know it's through separation. Sometimes we know you can be living with someone and an illness can strike that means that sometimes you feel like you're living with someone who is, I guess, in a sense, a shell of their former self. And when loss kicks in, when grief kicks in, a lot of the time people have a difficulty believing that there is such thing as love again. What are your beliefs around this? And also, have they changed from what they were to how you see things now?
Well, first, let me just tackle this thing, because grief and loss. Because for me, I treat the two as two separate things. In order for me to move on, I had to deal with these two issues. Loss for me, how I had to interpret loss was that this was memories, good memories which we share, the memories that you have of a loved one, the songs you played and you heard together, the places you visited, you know, the conversations you have, and all those kind of things that you look back at and you think, oh, I remember this, and you look back and it brings joy to your heart. That is part of the loss, because that no longer is going to happen. But you still remember the good times, you still remember the happy times. I call that loss. So when I think of Carolyn, I think of her in that position of a loss. The other side is grief. Grief to me is not my friend. Grief is just that emotions, when it comes, it just slaps you. It's just, grief is like a bully that just comes, it's uninvited, it just turns up anytime it wants to, and it just devastates you. And for me, what grief does, it makes you stay locked into a cycle, and it's so hard to be able to move forward. So I think in terms of when you're talking about love, it depends on where you are in that cycle. Because if you're in that cycle of grief and it's just never ending, you're just going round and round and round, it's very hard to even think about starting a relationship again, because it's so toxic. To me, it's so hard, because grief just does not allow you the luxury of moving forward, because it locks you into a sense of guilt. It just is kind of like debilitating. Where for me, I had to get rid of grief, as it were, and more focus in terms of loss. So when I think of Carolyn, I think of it of a chapter in my life that was fantastic. A chapter in my life up until the 32 years, that was an incredible time of my life. Incredible memories, and so much joy. But now a new chapter needs to begin. And for me, until I can deal with grief, I can't start a new chapter. It just holds me back. So what I had to deal with was, and asking the Lord was, how do I change that mindset? How do I get out of that? And the only prayer I can pray was asking the Lord to heal my heart, because I just could not find a way forward because it was just brokenness, such a just don't know where to go, nowhere forward. And so for me, until that grief was to be able to be controlled or to be pushed to one side, to talk about finding love again would just almost be impossible. So it took me a while to work it through, and I'm not perfect yet. It's still a work in progress. So you're still working on it. So you remember loss of the things that you've lost, but every now and then grief comes knocking on the door, and it's just how you control or how you deal with grief as part of the process of the journey of finding love again.
As you say that, I reflect back on our last session as well, when we were speaking about loss and grief. And we were recognizing loss as being that having lost something or someone, and it's possible to lose something or someone and not experience the feelings of that. It's possible to disconnect, or it's possible for that to be delayed. And as you're talking about, grief is now the emotional experience of that loss. And we know it's a process. We know it can be different for many people, but what it sounds like to me you're saying is that for you, being able to make that clear separation between the two, and being able to, as you said, ask God, heal my heart. That's the emotional side of you that you're aware needed some working on. Probably will still, because we know it's that process. But actually being able to recognize the loss, it almost feels like a bit more of a practical thing. Being able to see as a loss, and the grief now is something that actually we can't prepare for necessarily, can we? And it hits in different ways and at different times, and is triggered by a lot of different things. So if we talk a bit more about the grief, if we can, thinking about how do you've spoken about so many different ways in which there has been grief. How do you think that has affected you, whether maybe physically, mentally? First, let's think about how it's affected you in terms of yourself first and your identity.
I think if I speak from a church perspective, when we deal with, if it's anything in regards to spiritual, we've been trained how to do that. You go into spiritual warfare, you get your Bible out, the sword of the Spirit, you speak in tongues, you've got your worship music, and we can deal with it. We know how to deal with it. When it's an emotional thing, that's when it's like it's a whole different ball game, because we don't really have conversations, especially in terms of black men, in terms of dealing with emotional things, and also when you could be viewed as being vulnerable and still being able to be open and transparent, because if you're going to work through this and be healed properly, to me, you have to go through the process. You can't put on a Superman cape and just pretend you can just, you're Superman and you're just going to blaze through it. There's going to be times when you like, for me, when I'm with my children and I hear we talk about Karen, I'm going to break, I'm going to go into tears. It's just one of those things. And so you have to be, it is a case of being vulnerable, but also being honest and giving you, and letting people know, sometimes I look okay, but there's other times I would just be blank because something's been said or something's just triggered and I'm processing it. So for me, you have to be honest with yourself and be honest with the people around. Let people know that emotions are there, and it's like a roller coaster. It's not constant. 1 minute they can see you happy, and then they're thinking, well, what's happened to Pastor Delway? Because it's a roller coaster. You're up and down, and you do want to get to a place where you're more consistent and more of a constant, but it's not always the case. But if people know that you are on a journey of being healed, then I find that they will be able to support you more if you're honest. And that's what I try to be as a pastor, as a leader, as a father. I wanted my children and I wanted the people around me to know this is an emotional thing. This is not spiritual, and with emotions you have to walk through this. And the thing is, what I found was, in being open and transparent with those around, I found I was able to get more help.
Yeah.
And I found it to be quite supportive, actually, and as a way of kind of part of the process of healing. And then you have to kind of give yourself permission to say it's okay. Sometimes you're going to cry. And it's okay. It's part of the process. It's not that you're weak and you got, you got no backbone. It's emotions. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
So yes, you're going to go through tears sometimes, and then another time you could be thinking about happy things. But as long as the people around you, to me, as long as you're honest and open with them. If you're having, like for me, if I'm having a tough time, I let people know I'm having a tough time. And I found that people understood. It's like, yeah, we get it, because we're going through the same thing like what you're going through as well. And other people can identify with it. So I think honesty is good, and to speak about it, but not all the time. Because sometimes what I found was keep speaking about it kept reopening the wound. And it's just like, just when you feel like I'm getting to a place where it's getting better, I have to reopen the wound again and go through all that emotion. So it can sometimes be triggering where you just say, I just want to move on. I just want to move on. But you can understand sometimes people do want to ask you questions. Sometimes people do want to, you do have to go back and revisit some of those conversations of what happened and how you're feeling, that kind of stuff. But yeah, the honesty and transparency really does help.
Yeah, and as you were saying there about earlier, you mentioned this idea of not really having any space. The phone going off, everybody wanting to check in and wanting to know. And I'm really aware that whilst we're talking to you here as Delroy Smith, you have those other roles of Pastor Delroy Smith, as Daddy, and so actually in all of this, how do you think that was being impacted? Maybe carrying your own grief and having to pastor a church and having your children to support through their grief whilst managing yours. What was that like for you?
I think one of the advantages is that if I speak firstly with the family, my first port of call is my family and being responsible for the emotional health of our family. And because we've always been, the four of us has always been open and honest, we've always talked on issues. So it's just quite natural for us to kind of gravitate and talk through things. And that's what we done. We shared and we talked. We kept in touch with each other, checking in with each other, seeing where each other was in terms of the journey. And for me, it was important that we didn't sugarcoat things, because obviously sometimes it's like you can feel, I don't want to burden my children down with what I'm going through. Then you can become dishonest. And for me, it can become damaging, because what happens is you start to create a separation. And so we wanted to walk through this together. We were a team, and we will walk through this together. We will heal together. Although I know we deal with grief in different ways, but the thing was to still stay together as a unit. And then in terms of the church was, again, I thank God for our church, because the people there were so understanding and were so brilliant in terms of, for me to have a sabbatical and take that time. I remember Pastor Cleve saying to me, Pastor, take as long as you want. And it sounds so simple, but not because of my previous experience in terms of working with other church leaders. Sometimes you don't have that, where someone will say, take whatever time you need for healing. We got this. We will look after church for you. Don't have to worry. That took the absolute pressure off me. So I didn't have to really worry about church. It was about, because I'm sure with the members it's like, Pastor, you need to look after yourself. Because we just didn't, of course the members didn't want me to just be back in the pulpit like nothing happened. You can't be with someone 32 years and just step back on and like, because people will be thinking, something's not right here. And you're kind of damaged goods trying to lead a congregation. It doesn't work. So I think the church was incredible, and the thing is, in our church RCC, we don't have to be super spiritual. We're honest people, and we can go to God, let God know where we're vulnerable at, and we can be transparent before God and before each other. And I think the ministry, Restoration City Church, the people there was absolutely incredible. So I didn't have to worry about if I take a sabbatical, when I come back, is the church going to be divided? Is someone going to run away with the members? You know, that kind of thing. There's some core people who looked after everything. And so it allowed us to go on a holiday together as a family. I had my two sisters who came in to make sure that we kept the doors open of communication. We as a family, we stay united together, because sometimes when you go through grief, everybody goes into their own corner, and then you have a void, and then next minute your family's all over the place, and because grief has certain emotions, you sometimes are angry, and you're angry at the situation, but you take it out on the people you love, and so next minute you start to get angry and annoyed with the people around you, and that causes more problems. We wanted to make sure that we went on holiday and we done things that kept us together, and the key thing was that we kept talking.
Brilliant.
And so we could kind of hear where each other is at, and we was able to support each other through that.
And what was that like for you, hearing where your children were at? You're a pastor, you've done lots of pastoral counselling for people that have gone through grief and various things, and hearing them, what was it like hearing your own children and maybe trying to counsel them or support them?
The thing is, as a parent, you want to protect your children. It's a natural instinct that I need to protect my children. But this was something that I couldn't protect them. And the only way I can really do things was to make sure I look after myself, so that they didn't have to end up burying two people.
Right, yeah.
And that was the key thing, is in loving them was looking after myself, because that's what they would want.
Of course.
They just didn't want to add another trauma, or dad's just kind of fall into pieces. So I had to make sure in the midst of this I'm looking after myself, and that way that's how I looked after them.
Okay. So I know we've spoken a lot now about the backstory, and there is so much to it. As you said, 32 years it's very hard to squeeze into such a short space of time. But hopefully now listeners will understand and have a little bit of a backstory into how we got to this point. So we know that there came a point where, you did start dating again. And I guess we appreciate that there are usually some sort of said rules around dating. But I can imagine that that's probably quite different for a pastor. So first of all, maybe, as a pastor, can you tell us a little bit about what that journey was like? How did you enter into this phase of your life? And what were some of those maybe rules that you had in mind, or, maybe some of the assumptions you made about what that should look like?
I think one of the things as a leader is that we've always been counseled to be careful in terms of how we react with women of the opposite sex. So I've always tried to be disciplined. If for example, if I was close to a particular female, Carolyn would be the person who would say, I'm uncomfortable, you need to pull back. And she was never a jealous type of person, but I'd be saying, why? She said, I'm not getting a good vibe. And if that was the case, then that's it, I will kind of pull back. But I've always tried to be disciplined in terms of, I've never really had relationships with women in terms of long conversations. I literally go to work, I go to church, and I'm home. I'm so boring. You have these reality TV shows. I would have no views, because my life was really, really boring, in the sense that there was no there was nothing. It was there, I don't ramp with women, I don't play with women. And even with male friends, I was limited in terms of male friends. So with Carolyn gone, I just didn't know what to do, because I realised I didn't really I've got few friends, couple of pastors that I'm close to, but I have no one. And in terms of female company, I've never had that. So I wouldn't even know, to be honest with you, I wouldn't even know where to look or anything, because it's always been Caroline. And when you're happy in a marriage, I didn't have to look elsewhere, because I had everything that I needed. So to be honest with you, it just didn't even cross my mind, because I don't see the kind of qualities I saw in Caroline I don't see that normally in relationships. So I wouldn't even know to say I'm going to look for a new woman or anything like that. I wouldn't have a clue. I wouldn't even know where to begin, because number one, I wouldn't be looking inside my own congregation to be there. It's just uncomfortable. The whole thing is just uncomfortable. Already, right? But I've always been teaching for years, especially when it came to Valentine's, and in this country and also in other countries which I've ministered. I've always said that I don't see nothing wrong if there's you want to go to the cinemas and you're two single people, why can't you phone sister so-and-so or brother so-and-so and say, let's go pictures? It doesn't mean that something has to happen out of it, but why do you have to go on your own when there's people in the church? You can have friendships if you want to go to the theatre or something like that. I've always had that concept. Yeah, that's fine to do that. And I had to that was part of my own medicine, because it was like, okay, I'm sitting down. I think it was the Woman King came on. I was like, I want to go and watch that. And bless her heart, I used to keep taking my daughter. And after a while, it's like, no, she must be fed up with going with dad all the time. Company. Yeah, go and find someone else. And that was the interesting thing, was like, who do I go with? Yeah. Number one, being a man, recently lost someone. And number two, being a pastor. If I ask a woman to go cinema, what is that going to look like? Or if I say I want to go to dinner, I can't just sit at home every single day, just staring at four walls. It's just, was a really difficult thing. And so it wasn't me looking for love, but I had love in me that I think I wanted to explore that, but not knowing how to. And also understanding that whoever this person will be, they would have to be super special, because there's so much baggage in the sense that he's a pastor. What's his intentions? He's still going through a grieving process. How's the church going to view things? How the family is going to view? There's so much pressure. It is pretty daunting. It's pretty daunting. So I think in terms of relationship, that was completely out of my mind, because that is just asking too much of a person. I can imagine, and with all those added bits that you were saying about, what it's like in your role as well, I can imagine all of those on top of it. So how did the lovely Carmen come on the scene then? It was literally because of the church barbecue, and at the time I was just talking to people, and I didn't notice anything, because as I said, I've never really had close conversation or in-depth conversation with women. It's just a discipline. I've always tried to keep away from that. And I think we were just sitting and we're just talking, and I was thinking, this person is so nice to talk to. And it's like, it's the first time for years that I'm talking to someone. Although the whole church is there, everyone's there, but it was just, at least I was talking. That was the thing. Instead of me normally sitting quietly by myself, I was actually talking. And it was other people who had noticed a chemistry. that I didn't see. And that was in July of 2021. No, 22.
22.
Yeah. And so it was just a talk.
Yeah.
And then that was in July. And then it wasn't until the end of the year, I thought, let's go to dinner. But it was meant to be with other people.
Yeah.
And they dropped out. So it ended up, it was just me and her. And we was just talking. And again, it was just a really in-depth conversation. And it was really nice. And I just enjoyed the company. It was a person who's really matured, and she talked, and we talked, and yeah, it was just kind of a casual thing again. Nothing, I didn't think anything of it in terms of I'm trying to get into a relationship. That wasn't the thing. It was just friendship and having someone to talk to, and we found that things between us was really good. I found it really easy to communicate with her. Whether she found it easy to communicate with me, that's a whole different thing. But it was really nice in terms of just having a casual conversation. That's how I found.
So you said before that you've always taught that it's fine, for someone to go and to the cinema theatre with somebody else, and it doesn't have to be anything. You said that on this occasion it was supposed to be a group of you going out. The others didn't come for any reason. At that point, was you just, yeah, it's fine? Or what was going through your mind in that situation?
I was fine but cautious because as a pastor, I have to be very careful in terms of how I treat women in the church. I have to make sure that women never feel uncomfortable around me. So I always put certain things in place. I'm never normally on my own with a person. So yeah, I'm super cautious, and I think even with Carmen again, I wanted to make sure that, as the old school people say, I was circumspect. Walk circumspect, and so that's what it was. I was very disciplined. I'm a very disciplined person anyway. So yeah, it was fine. And then afterwards, I think people kept saying, you two would make a good couple kind of thing. And people was kind of hinting, especially my family was hinting. And I was thinking, would they be okay if I did want to start a relationship? Would they be okay with this? Because I would be thinking that. They'd be thinking, Dad, no, you were married to Mum, no. And the church, no, the type of thing. But they kind of put that seed in my head, and it was like, okay, let me go another time, and we went out again and we talked, and then I made it quite clear. I said, look, I don't have women relationships. I don't do that. But if we were to go down that road, I would need to speak to my family first. And what I would suggest is that before we go any further, because what we didn't want to do is invest any emotions into this. I'm too fragile to be invested emotional. So I said, look, before anything transpires, you speak to your family, see how they feel. I will speak to my family and see how they feel. Then we'll come back together and we'll talk. And that's exactly what we done. We went and I spoke to my family, and if I was to start a relationship, how would you guys feel about it, and that kind of thing. And that's when Shara was showing me a video about a pastor who went through a similar experience in terms of losing someone and was able to go back into another relationship. And when I was in America as well, when I was ministering in America with Bishop John, there was a pastor who spoke to me privately. He was the pastor's husband, and he had pulled me to one side and said, Delwa, you will find love again. I was like, no, I don't want to know, that kind of thing. And so once we talked, it was like, okay, it's possible for us to start a relationship. If we did, I've got my family's blessing. So the question is, do we want to do this? But I made it quite clear, if I do this, it will not be I'm not doing a long-winded romance thing. It will be very short term, because again, as a minister of the gospel, I can't be seen to be dating women and to be going out on dates and things like that. So I said, look, if we're going to do this, I think we had this conversation in March, April.
Okay.
I said, if we do this, it will be a short thing. So think about it. And she went away and she thought about it and was like, yeah, I'm good to go. And I spoke with my family and was like, that's good to go. So I think it's around April, May time we started the date. And by November, we were married.
And so some people will hear that and think that that was very quick. Some people will, want to know a little bit more about what you're saying about the process for you, because I guess on the one hand, you're saying as a pastor, there are certain responsibilities, there's certain ways you have to carry yourself differently, where other people, I suppose the pressure isn't on them in the same way. But here also you're saying that this is a proposal that you made to Carmen. And so she would also have to be in agreement with that decision. I'm hearing that there was the family that you almost needed the blessing from. You also mentioned, would the church be okay with this? So it seems like it wasn't purely on your own feelings.
No, because what we had to do, we both had to go pray about it and hear from God in terms of, it doesn't matter how great the person is this person part of your destiny? And for me, it was when you get a chance to speak to Carmen, you will hear her journey, how she was comfortable in the church and the Lord pulled her out and sent her to our church.
Wow.
And that was because one of the members in our church said, Pastor, she felt the Lord saying to her, the Lord sent her to you. Wow. And when you speak to Carmen, it was just like, she's the exact person I would want. So it's almost like with my late wife, up until I was 30, after 32 years, Carolyn was the perfect person for me to get me to where I am.
Yeah.
And in the next phase of my journey, Carmen has all the qualities and everything that I could possibly ask for. She has it. And it's almost like the Lord had kept her and like, no, you now need to keep yourself, because there's a plan for you and there's someone for you. And so she had to go through her process and not knowing, Lord, what's happening here. But the Lord had a bigger picture. And I really believe what the Lord does, he will bring the person to us, but he's not going to force the person on you.
Right.
You've got to open your eyes, and when the Lord sends you a blessing, you've got to know when a blessing comes, or else you're going to miss your blessing. And if I was so caught up with grief, I would miss a blessing. And that's the key thing. Sometimes you don't know when God has sent a blessing your way, and that's why you need sometimes the people around you to help you in terms of making sure that don't miss this blessing. But yes, you have to, as a pastor, have to walk through guilt, because you're going to feel guilty in terms of, is it too early in terms of starting a relationship? You have to deal with people's opinions, and they may not even know your story, but they've got an opinion. Yeah. You've got to deal with that. You've got to deal with what happens if the family or the wider family, what happens if they don't want to accept this? Yeah. You've got to deal with it. How am I going to break the news? And for me, it was like, I'm a big man. Why do I need people's consent? But in the midst of this, the good thing was that I went to my bishop and said, look, I need some counsel. How do I walk through this relationship? What do I need to do? And I had some good friends as well, pastoral friends, that I spoke to in terms of principles and being accountable, so that you just don't go off and do your own thing. It's about being accountable. And so they helped me in regards to this. And part of what they were saying is just making sure that with Carmen, she doesn't feel that she's second best. Is making sure that I make sure that she feels she is the best. And if I keep bringing up the past all the time, think about how is that going to impact her? How is she going to feel about that? So we had to, all those things has to be balanced, because you don't want to forget your past, but you also have a blessing in front of you, and you want to make sure you treat that blessing right.
Yeah, yeah. You know, and as you talk about, you know, the impacts possibly on Carmen in terms of, you know, feeling second best, we know that there would have been a number of different challenges, as any relationship is anyway, you know, but the additional challenges you may face, we're talking about grief here, we're talking about both sides having adult children, we're talking, you know, there's so many different dynamics to consider. So, you know, can you tell us a little bit, give us a little insight into what were some of maybe the challenges that you did face, you had to overcome? Because we know, as I said, that relationship is a journey and it's not always so smooth sailing. What are some of the things you had to work through?
Couple of things. Number one is you have to make sure that you don't compare. You can't compare one person to another. So I had to ensure that that didn't happen. I had to deal with personal guilt and giving myself permission to be able to move forward, because I have to think about in terms of myself, because if you try to live your life pleasing other people, you're going to end up miserable. But you have to give yourself, I had to give myself permission to say, Daryl, it's okay to be happy again. Yeah. And with Carmen, her personality, it was just like medicine. She made it really easy for me to love her. And it's almost like God had been preparing her for me. So it was literally a perfect match for us. Then the thing is just making sure her children are okay in regards to letting them. And I sat down with the children, her children, and their thing is, we can see our mum's happy. Yeah. As long as our mum's happy and you're treating our mum right, we're okay. So that was a blessing. And then the hard thing was letting my family know. That was just so difficult. So we done a Zoom meeting, and I told the family, and it was just silence. It was just silence. That was really difficult. Then there was people who I felt who had been there with me in a journey, yourself and Tash, Shireen, who've been with us in the journey, and I felt quite rightly I need to speak to you guys as well.
We felt honored.
And so we spoke to you, and then my leadership team. So once it was on board, then it was almost like the wheels began to go into motion. It started to get easier and easier. But obviously for poor Carmen, she was like, if we was walking down the road, she's a very tactile person. She likes holding hands. She's a very loving type of person. So when walking down the street, especially in Croydon, she wants to hug me. And it's like, no, we're not allowed to hug. It's like, what? Like, no, we're not allowed to hug. It's like, are you serious? No, because if people see us, we don't do that thing. We don't hold hands and things like that. And it was a bit challenging for her, because it's like, why? It's like, because I'm a pastor. I have to behave myself. I have to control ourselves. And of course, we don't believe in, in terms of sex before marriage. So we had to make sure that we didn't put ourselves in a position that would test us, So we had to make sure we behave ourselves and we don't rev up the engine. You know what I mean? You keep yourself in the right way. So yeah, we done that. So every now and then is you're still, whilst you're on that journey, and finding love again is absolutely incredible. And those of you who are listening, it's important that you give yourself the permission to say it's okay to find love again. It's okay for me to laugh again. It's okay for me to be happy again. Because sometimes you may not get that from your family. Your immediate family might be thinking, no, Dad, you can't move on, and no, Mum, you can't. And they might have a certain amount of control on you. But it's about you. What is it you want for yourself? And you've got to give yourself permission to say, it's okay for me to be happy again. If going into another relationship is not for you, that's fine. Don't force it. But for those who want to find love again, for those who are sitting at home thinking, there's got to be more than this, and you want to explore a relationship again, give yourself permission to do that. And give yourself permission to say, it's okay to be happy, because I know the feeling of having a really great time with Carmen, and we're laughing, we're joking, and and then you go home, and then sometimes it's like you feel a bit guilty. It's like you've forgotten about Carolyn. It's like, I can never forget about Carolyn. That to think that is crazy, because you don't be with someone 32 years when you wake up every day and your family's your priority. It doesn't go away.
No.
But for me, it was important to understand it's a new chapter, and in part of having a new chapter is giving yourself that permission to say it's okay to love, it's okay to laugh, and we deserve to be happy again. We deserve to have some love in our lives and joy in our lives. We deserve it.
And it's great to hear you say, and I think that's such an important message to leave with people, to help them to realise that actually it's something you deserve, because oftentimes people don't feel that they deserve good things, especially when something quite traumatic, especially something such as loss, has happened in their lives. I feel like you've done a pretty good job already of helping people to think about, maybe finding love again after loss. But maybe someone is listening and maybe they're at that stage, where they have lost they've lost their spouse, and right now they can't even maybe think that far. They're not even so sure. What could you say as we look to wrap up? What would your words be to those that are listening?
I would say, don't push. If you're not ready for it yet, then ask the Lord wherever you are in your journey. Ask the Lord to help you where you're at. Because as I said, sometimes you're caught up in grief and you cannot see the woods from the tree. So wherever you are in a journey, your story is different from somebody else's story. So it's being true to yourself. But I would say, wherever you are, work on yourself, that if God does bring another person in your life, you are ready and you're opened to be able to take on a new relationship. But you've got to work on yourself. You've got to work on any issues that you feel that, because grief changes you. And you're literally trying to find out who you are again and discovering yourself. But whilst you are waiting, or whilst that partner is on its way to you, do some work on yourself. And whatever that looks like, for me was going to the gym, working on looking after my body, looking after my mental health, prayed up spiritually and get part of the healing. So that when the person does come into your life, you're not completely broken and completely smashed. Work on yourself, work on your personality, work on those areas that are challenging, so that when you do meet the person, that you're in a position to be able to start a fresh relationship without having so much baggage.
Brilliant. You've heard it. Our pastor, Delroy Smith, sharing a little snippet, I have to say, of his experience of grief, his experience of loss, his experience of life, doing love again after loss as well. And so we thank you for your openness. We thank you for sharing. I know there is so much more we could have said and so much more you could have answered, but we thank you for this opportunity. And we thank everyone for tuning in, for listening, and, for just giving yourselves a moment to hear Pastor's heart. Maybe it's touched upon you, and, maybe seeking some additional support is something you might want to do. And what we also want to do is encourage you to continue praying for our pastor and praying for our First Lady Carmen as they enter into or continue on this next journey of their lives. Thank you. It's been Restoration Talks.